School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. The Yao Mean of Revolution. Iran exposes Trump lies. U.S. bases destroyed. World news. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We got some revolutionary lunch for y'all. Trump is exposed. Iran is the Middle Eastern superpower. Let's get into that. Chinese satellite images.
Just like a few days ago,
China has revealed swarms of Iranian boats all throughout the Strait of Hormuz. But Trump said he destroyed their navy. He's a liar, and he's getting exposed by the day.
Satellite imagery from May 8, 2026, once again reveals the presence of a massive fleet of IRGC Navy fast boats still actively operating, signaling dominant control over the choke point in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. The imagery shows more than 100 fast attack boats lined up in a single operational formation, an unprecedented level of activity in the strait. These are Hadar 110 or Hadar 110 fast attack boat.
This the Iranian Navy. This the Iranian Navy. Hundreds of attack boats throughout the Strait of Hormuz. But the American media, they can't find those pictures, y'all. But if Trump say he blew up a boat, they beating their chest and talking tough on Fox News. But the truth is, like China released today, hundreds of these fast swarm attack boats is patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. Satellite imagery. We don't got to take their word for it.
In game changer, something Trump's Project Freedom will have to contend with. Intelligence indicates that a swarm of high-speed Mosquito fleet boats, armed with machine guns, rockets, anti-ship missiles, mines, and drone boats, may have mined the Strait of Hormuz. The world's fastest patrol boats have been spotted operating along the safe passage route unilaterally established by the U.S. Navy, raising serious concerns that sea mines have been laid to target the navigation of violating vessels. A few days ago, U.S. warships attempted to enter the Strait of Hormuz to evacuate commercial vessels subject to Iranian sanctions, but came under Iranian missile fire, forcing two other destroyers to flee to the Arabian Sea. NASA satellite imagery of the fires that broke out following the clash between the U.S. and Iran in the Strait of Hormuz on the night of May 8 shows several hotspots at the southernmost point of the strait. The ongoing fires followed reports of intense activity by fast attack boats in the same area, followed by various vessels coming under fire. As U.S. military forces attempted to exit the strait from this point, they were attacked and set ablaze there. With hundreds of fast boats, oil spills, and fires, it appears this conflict is not only still alive but also intensifying significantly in the strait. Project Freedom highlights the irony of blaming Iran for the chaos triggered by Trump-era policies, which lasted only 48 hours and were labeled a failure, noting that 1,600 ships were stranded in the Strait of Hormuz, according to a CNN report. Experts warn that the U.S. must realize that the U.S. Navy is not as strong as they think, and has no clue how quickly Iran is advancing in drones and missiles. Iran has once again outmaneuvered the U.S. with these small, deadly fast boats, raising the question of how to control the Strait of Hormuz. Hadar 110, unveiled in early 2025, proves that size doesn't matter. Speed, efficiency, and intelligence are the keys to dominance. This fast boat is designed for asymmetric warfare, employing hit-and-run swarm tactics in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, to counter larger, slower naval vessels. It is designed to be stealthy with an operational range of up to 650 kilometers, capable of firing 2 anti-ship cruise missiles, and then fleeing at speeds of 203 kilometers per hour due to lightweight carbon fiber, making it a significant enhancement to Iranian coastal defense capabilities and naval deterrence. No aircraft carriers, no destroyers, just swarms of fast boats arriving from all directions at once, or changing course whenever they see fit. Small crews mean minimal casualties, and cheap boats mean no fear of losses. This is what makes them truly dangerous, driving U.S. ships away with their tails between their legs.
U.S. government officials, they claim that their war against Iran has gone extremely well. And Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed, falsely, as I'll show today, that supposedly the U.S. has destroyed Iran's military capabilities. Listen to Trump's claims, and then I'll explain why they're wrong.
We are systematically dismantling the regime's ability to threaten America or project power outside of their borders. That means eliminating Iran's Navy, which is now absolutely destroyed.
Lies.
Hurting their Air Force and their missile program at levels never seen before, and annihilating their defense industrial base. We've done all of it. Their Navy is gone. Their Air Force is gone. Their missiles are just about used up or beaten. They are begging to make a deal, not me. They're begging to make a deal. And anybody that saw what was happening over there would understand why they want to make a deal.
So that's Trump's narrative. He claims that the U.S. destroyed Iran's military, and he even argued that Iran does not understand that it has been defeated.
Well, they're militarily defeated. In their own minds, maybe they don't know that.
However, here in reality, we have more and more evidence demonstrating that it's actually the U.S. military that has suffered significant damage in this war. Every week, a new report comes out in mainstream U.S. media outlets citing U.S. intelligence officials and top military brass who admit on record that Iran has actually destroyed and seriously damaged the U.S. military bases surrounding it in West Asia, in the so-called Middle East, that it's going to cost tens of billions of dollars to repair these bases if they're ever actually rebuilt. And meanwhile, there are reports showing that Iran's military capabilities have not been destroyed. Iran still has the majority of its missiles in its stockpile, and it has the ability to create more missiles as this war continues. And then finally, the cherry on top is that there are reports that it's actually the U.S. military that is running out of missiles fast, and it will take many years to replace them. So today I'm going to review all of this evidence and show how what Trump is claiming is the exact opposite of reality. So let's start reviewing the evidence. This May, CNN published an investigation in which it revealed that the majority of U.S. military sites in the Middle East, in West Asia, have been damaged by Iran. CNN reported, quote, at least 16 American military sites have been damaged in Iranian strikes, making up the majority of U.S. positions in the Middle East, end quote. CNN published another report at the end of April titled, Repairing Damaged U.S. Military Bases Will Add Billions to Iran War Cost, sources say. This report noted that initially, the Pentagon claimed that in the first 2 months, this war cost $25 billion. However, other internal sources admitted that is an extremely low estimate. It does not include the cost of repairing the extensive damage suffered by U.S. bases in the region. The real estimate is closer to $40 to $50 billion when accounting for the costs of rebuilding U.S. military installations and replacing destroyed assets. Now, this is assuming that those bases are rebuilt in the first place. This report noted that in the first 48 hours of this war, a war of aggression that was launched in a surprise attack by the U.S. on the 28th of February, in the first 2 days, Iran destroyed 9 U.S. military sites in Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE, and Qatar. Iran destroyed radar systems worth billions of dollars, along with billions of dollars of U.S. aircraft. So those 2 reports from CNN were just the beginning of the evidence. Like I said, every few days, another report comes out in a major U.S. media outlet admitting the truth that the U.S. government has been obscuring and lying about for weeks now. The Washington Post published another major report this May, noting that Iranian strikes have hit at least 228 structures or pieces of equipment at U.S. military sites since the war began. And the Washington Post wrote, quote, "The destruction is far greater than what was previously reported or acknowledged by the U.S. government," end quote. The Washington Post noted that Iran has destroyed U.S. military hangars, barracks, fuel depots, aircraft, and key radar communications and air defense equipment. And it added that, quote, "The threat of air attacks rendered some of the U.S. bases in the region too dangerous to staff at normal levels, and commanders moved most of the personnel from these sites out of the range of Iranian fire at the start of the war," end quote. By the way, this was one of the key goals that Iran had. It wanted to expel the U.S. from the dozens of military installations surrounding it in West Asia. And there are now multiple reports in major U.S. media outlets citing top U.S. officials admitting that Iran has accomplished that goal and has expelled most of the U.S. military forces from the region. The New York Times published a similar report in March titled "Iran's Attacks Force U.S. Troops to Work Remotely." This report noted that Iran's attacks on U.S. military bases, which were done in self-defense in response to a U.S. war of aggression, have been, quote, "forcing many American troops to relocate to hotels and office spaces throughout the region. Much of the land-based military is, in essence, fighting the war while working remotely," end quote. The New York Times added that thousands of U.S. military forces have been sent to Europe, and the U.S. is using bases in Europe in order to wage this war against Iran. The New York Times added that, quote, "many of the 13 military bases in the region used by American troops are all but uninhabitable," end quote. That is an extremely important revelation that directly contradicts what the U.S. government is saying. So thus far, I have reviewed reports published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN, all acknowledging the undeniable reality, the truth at this point, that the U.S. military has suffered significant damage at the hands of Iran. NBC News also published a very similar report in April titled "Iran Caused More Extensive Damage to U.S. Military Bases Than Publicly Known." Citing U.S. government officials, it acknowledged the same, quote, "American military bases and other equipment in the Persian Gulf region suffered extensive damage from Iranian strikes that is far worse than publicly acknowledged and is expected to cost billions of dollars to repair," end quote. So what all of this shows is that Donald Trump lied. He claimed that the war is going swimmingly. Everything is going perfectly well. Iran has been defeated. The U.S. military is triumphant.
Well, they're militarily defeated. In their own minds, maybe they don't know that.
Most traders chase stocks, but there's a smarter way, one that targets the S&P 500 directly using a contract called the XXP. It's fast, tax-friendly, built for precision. And when you combine it with a 4 p.m. payout strategy, you get a repeatable.
That's all false. It's all disinformation and propaganda to convince people that this war of choice, an unnecessary war of aggression, has been a total success when all of the evidence demonstrates it is the exact opposite. So now that we have very clearly established that, I want to look at another very significant report showing how the US military is using up many of its advanced missiles, and it will take years to replace this military equipment. This was revealed in an article published this April in Fortune magazine titled, "The US military may have already used up half of its most expensive missiles, and it could take up to 4 years to rebuild its stockpiles." This article noted that, quote, "The US has depleted its store of 7 major types of missiles, intensifying concerns of a near-term risk it will run out of munitions for a future war," end quote. So these are the missiles that the Pentagon is running out of. It has used up 45% of its stockpile of precision strike missiles, 50% of its terminal high altitude area defense interceptors. Those are known as THAAD interceptors, which were largely based in South Korea, although the US has moved some of them to West Asia to wage this war and to protect some of the US allies in the region, like Israel. The US has also used up almost half of its stockpile of Patriot ballistic interceptor missiles, all within the first 7 weeks of the war against Iran. And that's not all. An even more amazing detail reported by Fortune magazine is that the media outlet calculated that just in the first 2 months of this war, the US spent $24 billion on the 7 major munitions used, but the cost of the war against Iran is much, much bigger than that. In fact, a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School said the cost of the war against Iran is likely to exceed $1 trillion. I repeat, $1 trillion when you include not only the cost of all of the missiles and other munitions and the planes that were destroyed and other equipment, but also the significant infrastructure damage of the US military bases that were destroyed and the lifetime disability benefits for thousands of veterans who have been significantly injured and in some cases paralyzed because of this totally unnecessary war of aggression launched by Donald Trump. Meanwhile, while the US military has already used up half of many of its missiles and it will take years to replace them, what do you think the situation is like in Iran? Trump and the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, have repeatedly claimed that Iran's missiles have been destroyed. Its military capabilities have been destroyed. But we now know that's a lie. It is simply not true, because the Washington Post published another major report this May titled, "U.S. Intelligence Says Iran Can Outlast Trump's Hormuz Blockade for Months." This article cites a confidential CIA analysis that was delivered to Trump administration policymakers. So Trump and these top US government officials know that they're lying to the public when they claim that Iran's military capabilities have been destroyed, because US intelligence analysts are telling them something completely different, and yet they go out on stage in these press conferences and they lie to the public. In reality, the CIA analysis concluded that Iran can survive the US naval blockade for at least 3 to 4 months before facing more severe economic hardship. This has been reported by the Washington Post. It added that Iran retains significant ballistic missile capabilities despite weeks of intense US and Israeli bombing. And I'm quoting here from the Washington Post, quote, "Iran retains about 75% of its pre-war inventories of mobile launchers and about 70% of its pre-war stockpiles of missiles," a US official said, end quote. They also added that the Iranian government has, quote, "been able to recover and reopen almost all of its underground storage facilities, repair some damaged missiles, and even assemble some new missiles that were nearly complete when the war began," end quote. So again, I have to repeat that what Donald Trump and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are all claiming about the war against Iran, it's all lies. They are falsely trying to convince people that this has been such a success that Iran is defeated, the US is triumphant and it's the greatest military on earth and Iran couldn't do anything. They're all lies. It's simply not true. And this is why even some major US allies in the region are getting cold feet. Like, for instance, Saudi Arabia, which hosts US military bases. And yet, Trump tried to carry out a military operation to forcibly open the Strait of Hormuz. This is the narrow strait off the coast of Iran. And before the US started this war of aggression at the end of February, 20% of globally traded oil passed through this narrow strait on a daily basis. And Trump announced this May he was going to carry out a military operation to forcibly open the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran had closed in self-defense. And yet Saudi Arabia got cold feet, and Saudi Arabia denied the US military access to its airspace in order to carry out this operation. This was a major blow to Trump. And why did Saudi Arabia do this? It's not because Saudi Arabia secretly loves Iran. On the contrary, they are regional rivals. It's because Iran has established a deterrent by causing significant damage to the neighboring countries, especially the Persian Gulf monarchies, like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Bahrain. These are countries that host US military bases. The US was using their territory in order to wage this war of aggression against Iran, which is why they were legitimate targets in Iran's acts of self-defense. And tens of billions of dollars worth of energy infrastructure, oil and natural gas infrastructure, has been damaged. And it will take many months, if not years, for previous levels of production to be reached once again. And we're only seeing the very beginning of the economic damage caused by this war. In fact, the Saudi regime is suffering from massive deficits. Saudi Arabia's budget deficit increased by $8.2 billion in the first quarter of 2026. The Saudi regime's deficit has more than tripled since the second quarter of 2025. And this is only the early preliminary data. In the upcoming months, we're going to see that these horrific monarchies, these dictatorships that are propped up by the US in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in the Qatar, in the UAE, they are going to suffer from tens of billions of dollars of losses because of the destruction of infrastructure, because of the loss of tourism revenue. These Persian Gulf monarchies had portrayed themselves as beacons of stability and peace in a turbulent region where the US and Israel are at nonstop war. And we now see how that was just marketing, and it was a lie. It's not true. These regimes host US military bases, and that's why Iran retaliated against them. That illusion has been dispelled, and this is why they're starting to get desperate. This is why the Saudi regime denied the US military access to its bases and airspace. I mean, those bases have already been largely destroyed, but Saudi Arabia simply does not want this war to continue because it knows it will cause even more damage. So all of this adds to the growing mountain of evidence demonstrating that the US empire has lost this war of aggression that Donald Trump launched against Iran. It was totally unnecessary. Trump thought he could carry out regime change. All he had to do was carry out so-called decapitation strikes and eliminate all of the political and military leadership in Tehran, and supposedly the Iranian government would collapse. That has not happened at all. The Iranian government has demonstrated that it is very resilient, and it actually probably has even more popular legitimacy now than it had previously, because many Iranians have rallied behind the flag and defended their country's sovereignty against this war of aggression launched by the world's most powerful empire. And this is why even the Wall Street Journal and the former editor of the Wall Street Journal, Gerard Baker, who's a right-wing former Trump supporter, even he acknowledged that the US is failing in its war against Iran. And some other media outlets have come out very clearly and said that Iran is winning. The Independent, which is a major newspaper in the UK, published an article titled, "Iran is the clear winner as Trump's desperate bid for peace shows he wants out of the war." if you look rationally at the evidence that has come out in the past several weeks as this war has dragged on, that is the conclusion you should come to. Or at the very least, if you think Iran is not winning necessarily, at the very least, the US empire has clearly been losing this war. It has failed to carry out regime change like it did in Syria or Iraq, yet alone state collapse like it carried out in the US-led NATO war in Libya in 2011, which totally destroyed the state and left behind a failed state and anarchy and civil war that is continuing to this day. Those goals have clearly failed. The Iranian government is stronger than ever. Moreover, the evidence that I surveyed today shows how Iran has succeeded in establishing deterrence by demonstrating to the US and Israel that if they attack it again in the future, Tehran can retaliate in self-defense and cause significant damage to US military bases in the region, to Israeli military infrastructure, and to the infrastructure of the Persian Gulf monarchies that support the US and Israel. The US military bases in the region have been destroyed or at least very significantly damaged. It will cost many billions of dollars to replace that infrastructure if the US even rebuilds these bases. Some of these countries in the region may decide, actually, we don't want to host these US military bases anymore. We thought the US was protecting us. In reality, the US is endangering us by making us a target in these future wars of aggression launched by the US and Israel. All of these details combined have demonstrated clearly that the US empire is losing this war, and Trump is lying when he goes out and claims that everything is going swimmingly, and you should just ignore all the evidence and believe what he claims. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical.
Mr. Arakchi's response, I would say that Iran is in a better position than the CIA is reporting. It's not 3 to 4 months. Iran can last indefinitely. On the missiles, I would just refer to Foreign Minister Arakchi's response. He said, we're not at 75%, we're at 120%, meaning that Iran has far more capability today than they had when the war started.
I'm here with one of our favorite guests, Scott Ritter, one-time Marine intelligence officer who served in the former Soviet Union, implementing arms control agreements from 91 and 98. He served as the chief inspector for the United Nations in Iraq, leading the search for Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Didn't find any. He was later a vocal critic of the American decision to go to war in Iraq. He's also the best-selling author of 9 books. His latest, Highway to Hell, The Armageddon Chronicles, 2015 and 2024. Welcome back to the show, Scott Ritter.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for being on, Scott. I always appreciate you accommodating our schedule. It's always nice. This is my Judge Napolitano impersonation. I hope you appreciate it. You're always very kind and generous. You know, we always appreciate your insights. It's amazing. Scott, so I wanted to get right to it. I saw this tweet by our friend Furkan. He says the Pentagon is in absolute panic mode. Al Jazeera completely exposes U.S. Central Command for dodging basic questions about massive damage to American vessels. The Trump administration recklessly fired on a tanker and sparked a retaliation. Trump is hiding a massive failure. Let's listen.
Well, that's right. And I should point out that we here at Al Jazeera have reached out to U.S. Central Command to try and get the U.S. take on what exactly occurred in the Strait of Hormuz in the last couple of hours. Our response was that they had nothing to offer us. In other words, they didn't confirm it, nor did they deny it. And we should point out that when it comes to Iran's state broadcaster, there have been reports of damage to U.S. vessels spills before. The United States has always denied or minimized that. And so it's really unclear right now exactly just what has occurred. But as you reported at the start of the bulletin, this escalation has come on the heels of the United States firing on Iranian tanker just one day earlier. And so there is certainly an incident that potentially has prompted the Iranians to now retaliate against the United States. But again, the United States Central Command not confirming, nor is it.
Okay, so Scott, do you have any, and this is from yesterday, do you have any information that could confirm or deny this report?
No, I don't have a hotline to Central Command, so I wish I did, but if I did, they probably wouldn't tell me anyways. I would err on the side of the Iranians being over optimistic. I do believe they engaged our ships. Our ships have some very sophisticated, self-defense capabilities. The important thing here isn't whether or not they, actually hit a ship and did damage, although that would be a very big story. It's that they made the ships turn around and run away. Apparently the attacks overwhelmed the defenses to the point that they had to use the close-in weapon system, basically the Phalanx 20 millimeter Gatling gun, in a desperate effort to stop the Iranian missile from hitting the ships. And the Gatling gun only has a finite amount of ammunition. It can cycle through that ammunition in 30 seconds. So had a second wave been launched and broken through the missile defense barriers, the ships would have been helpless. And so they had to leave. And this just again underscores the fact that Iran is in complete control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States Navy is powerless to change that equation.
Well, speaking to that point, the Washington Post reports that U.S. intelligence says Iran can outlast Trump's Hormuz blockade for months. And John Hudson did a nice summary of this. Confidential CIA analyst delivered to policymakers this week concludes that Iran can survive the U.S. naval blockade for at least 3 to 4 months before facing more severe economic hardship, finding that contradicts those hailing an imminent collapse. The U.S. intel also indicates that Iran retains about 75% of its pre-war inventories of mobile launchers and about 70% of its pre-war stockpiles of missiles. Per a U.S. official, the regime has also been able to recover underground storage facilities and repair damaged missiles. And here is from the report, one of the U.S. officials said they thought Iran's capacity to sustain prolonged economic hardship is far greater than even the current CIA estimate. The leadership has gotten more radical, determined, and increasingly confident that they can outlast U.S. political will and sustain domestic repression to check any resistance. Inside Iran, the official said, comparatively, you see similar regimes lasting years under sustained embargoes and air power only wars. What's your response to this report?
Well, I would say that the CIA doesn't have good insight into Iran to begin with. We've burned through 3 human intelligence networks over the years. And when I say burned through, that means that they were compromised and all of our spies on the ground were captured and killed. So we've been relying upon Israeli intelligence. That's what got us in this war to begin with, bad Israeli intelligence. So what we're looking here is a CIA assessment of, open source information, no spectacular insights. And the CIA is prejudiced against Iran. Even though these assessments are, show Iran to be in a better position than the White House has spun it, I would say that Iran is in a better position than the CIA is reporting. It's not 3 to 4 months. Iran can last indefinitely. People tend to forget that Iran has been laboring under, U.S. sanctions and restrictions on its oil economy for 47 years. This isn't their first rodeo, their first fluctuation in market realities. They know how to deal with this. It also ignores the fact that a great deal of Iran's oil production is consumed domestically. That they aren't necessarily held hostage to the closure of the strait as much as people might think. They have other ways to get oil to market. Right now, the Pakistani-Iranian border looks like something out of Mad Max with all the oil tankers going back and forth. The Iranians have mastered oil smuggling routes. They're not panicked at all. The Iranians I have spoken to say that there is no panic in Iran about the people that are panicked are the Gulf Arab states. Kuwait, for instance, who shipped zero oil last month. They're the ones running the storage problem. Same thing with Saudi Arabia, same thing United Arab Emirates. They're the ones that face, oil field closure and maintenance issues. So the CIA is wrong on the missiles. I would just refer to Foreign Minister Araghchi's response. He said, we're not at 75%, we're at 120%, meaning that Iran has far more capability today than they had when the war started. That reflects the reality that the United States hasn't destroyed anywhere near what we claim to have destroyed, and that Iran took their missile production underground. They've been building missiles during the war, and they're building missiles now. They have more missiles today of a more modern variety than what they started the war with.
Come see me on tour in Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Atlanta, Raleigh, North Carolina, Spokane, Tacoma, and Levittown, New York.
American radars in Arab countries. There is a conspiracy theory that says after Iran destroyed American radars in Arab countries, the rainfall increased in Iran. I wonder if it's true.
These programs, not surprisingly, are making a bad situation worse, not better. And, Tucker, they're being used as a form of warfare. And we know that. We have countries like Iran, constantly demonized, of course, as you well know. Immediately after 9/11, we have the list of countries to be targeted given to General Wesley Clark, a list that clearly existed before 9/11 even occurred. Subsequently, every one of those countries, every one of them endured a once in 1,000 year drought. Statistically, mathematically, that's impossible without climate intervention operations. And we have the leader of Iran on the floor of the UN, on film, on the record, stating NATO was cutting off their precipitation. We have Iranian top scientists recently saying NATO's been doing this for 40 years, destabilize the food supply by destabilizing the rain, and you destabilize the population.
Some people are going to call me a conspiracy theorist because of what I'm about to say regarding the weather engineering over Iran, which is being carried out by the United States in tandem, in all likelihood, with the United Arab Emirates. And I just want to be clear with all of you that you can call me whatever you want, but this is 100% real, right? We know for a fact that certain countries, including the United States, but other countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, they admit to doing cloud seeding, which is a form of geoengineering, weather engineering, right, to make it rain in certain climates where they don't historically have rain. They don't have this sort of weather, right? So this is a thing that countries do. And we're only ever told about it under the auspices of it being used for positive benefits for a given country or a given climate, right? Oh, we're doing it to help the environment here in the UAE. We're doing it to help because we don't get enough rain, so we need some rain. But they expect you to believe that they have this incredible geoengineering, weather engineering technology, and they don't use it for nefarious purposes. Now, if you want to believe that they have a technology of this caliber and they're not using it for nefarious purposes,
right? You'd have to believe that this is the only highly advanced technology on the face of the earth that the United States possesses that it does not use for nefarious purposes. And if you do believe that, you're low IQ. We'll be right back after a quick message from the sponsor of today's video, Venus AI. You ever notice how AI is starting to feel less like a tool and more like something that's watching you? Think about it. Major AI platforms are now talking about ads, data tracking, and moderation policies controlled by a small handful of people. ChatGPT even has the former director of the NSA sitting on its board. Edward Snowden called this a willful, calculated betrayal of the rights of every person on earth. How does it make you feel that your conversations with AI are tied to your identity? So the question is, do you actually trust these platforms with your conversations? Because I don't. That's why I've been using Venus AI, and I want to show you this. What's different about Venus is it lets you interact with some of the most powerful AI models out there. ChatGPT 5.2, Claude 4.5, Gemini Flash, Sword 2 Pro, and Nano Banana. But you stay completely anonymous the entire time. Venus even submits generations on your behalf, so they are never tied to your identity. Your chats are all encrypted, stored only on your device, and never tied to your identity. No corporation profiling you, no government surveillance, nothing. And it's not limited either. Venus runs open source models for text. Days this week, past 3-4 days, we've been seeing intense rains all throughout Iran. Now, what's going on here? Iranian embassy in Zimbabwe says, rain, rain, rain after years of drought. Who knows? Perhaps it's a gift from God for our resistance against the devil. Could be a lot of rain. It's a lot of rain for a country that has had like 4 decades of no rain. And before the war began, you had the president, Pezeshkian, who was literally going out on Twitter asking the people of Iran to pray for rain. Right? Because they had such a severe drought before the war began. It was so bad. It was so bad that we were talking about, like, will they have water to survive? That's how bad it was. I just wanted you to see the video of it snowing. It's like literally snowing, hail, sleet, snow. It's snowing in Iran right now. It's actually snowing. That's more of hail, I guess. But like, you get the idea. It's cold. It's not just cold, though. It's also raining, hailing. It's snowing in parts of Iran, of course, right now. And mind you, it's April 23rd, and it's snowing like this. And they've had like 4 decades of persistent drought. Now, take a look at this. This is the Pave Dam in Iran, and it's overflowing right now. And it's literally not been filled up anywhere near close for 7 years, but now it's overflowing. Zara Hamidia says there is a conspiracy theory that says after Iran destroyed American radars in Arab countries, the rainfall increased in Iran. I wonder if it's true. But alhamdulillah, for God's mercy on Iran, here's the overflow of a dam in Pave, Iran after 7 years. Health Ranger writes on Twitter, America was running weather control warfare on Iran to cause a multi-year drought that made Tehran nearly uninhabitable. Now the radar installations have been destroyed and rain returns. Take a listen to this guest on Tucker Carlson's show discuss how, yes, the U.S. has been utilizing geoengineering weather warfare against Iran for decades. And this video, mind you, was posted before the war in Iran began, long before. This video is like months old, but it's getting a lot of circulation right now for obvious reasons.
We know these programs, not surprisingly, are making a bad situation worse, not better. And, Tucker, they're being used as a form of warfare. And we know that. We have countries like Iran, constantly demonized, of course, as you well know. Immediately after 9/11, we have the list of countries to be targeted given to General Wesley Clark, a list that clearly existed before 9/11 even occurred. Subsequently, every one of those countries, every one of them was endured a once in 1,000 year drought. Statistically, mathematically, that's impossible without climate intervention operations. And we have the leader of Iran on the floor of the UN, on film, on the record, stating NATO was cutting off their precipitation. We have Iranian top scientists recently stating NATO's been doing this for 40 years. Destabilize the food supply by destabilizing the rain, and you destabilize the population.
There you go. He's also on Redacted this week discussing the very same matter. HAARP, bizarre 2025 rainfall patterns, prolonged drought in Iran, weather war.
Well, if you've been looking at the country of Iran over the past few years, you might have noticed some incredibly bizarre weather patterns. Rainfall totals plummeting by 77% in the year of 2025. All sorts of inextricably bizarre weather patterns that have been unfolding over that country over the past few years. Bizarre, intense weather over certain mountain ranges, but large drought as the people of that country have suffered not only under these weather patterns, but under sanctions. So what is actually going on here? Obviously, we've been focused on the geopolitics of all of this and missiles and politicians speaking. But at the heart of this, there's something something far more nefarious happening, which is weather manipulation, geoengineering on that country. Something that's not going to make the mainstream media headlines. You're certainly not going to see it on CNN or Fox News, but you will see it here. And that's why we wanted to talk about it today. And we wanted to bring on the founder of geoengineeringwatch.org, that is Dane Wigington, to talk about Iran and the weather manipulation that could potentially be happening in that country. Dane, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Thank you for your addressing all the issues you addressed, Clayton and Natalie, and certainly you're completely correct on everything you just outlined. In fact, the weather warfare being waged against Iran goes back 40 years plus, at least. And that's been acknowledged on the record by their meteorologists and their former president, Ahmadinejad, emphatically on the floor of the UN, twice, I believe, stating that NATO was cutting off their precipitation. Is that not a form of all-out warfare against a country, destabilizing their weather patterns, thus food production, thus destabilizing populations? How is that not warfare going on for decades in that country?
Now, we wouldn't have known this except for the last time that you were on, because this is not something that's widely discussed, but it is a tactic that the U.S. has employed in war going back at least to Vietnam. And now that is no longer a conspiracy. We actually did use cloud seeding to flood enemy trails in the Vietnam War. And you were on after a guest who debunked all of the crap about Iran and the nuclear weapons and trying to liberate their women. And you came on and said, I'd like to respond to that because we've been conducting weather warfare on them for decades. And Clayton and I were like, what? Wait, what? Right. So can you just give us a bit of this history, how we know it, what they've claimed, and what the technology is that we can use for it?
Climate engineering is more effective at diminishing and dispersing precipitation than even augmenting it. So you referred to Project Popeye in Vietnam. Yeah. Again, matter of historical record. The U.S. so successful at controlling precipitation over that country that in 1976, the international community passed the INMOD treaties, environmental modification treaties, forbidding weather warfare, but not forbidding a country from doing whatever it wants over its own citizens, i.e. us, for being treated the same as the Iranians are. So who is really in charge of this whole operation? I mean, people think our government is somehow being benevolent to our citizens any more than they are the Iranians.
Yeah, I don't understand how anyone who thinks that if we can do cloud seeding to make it rain more, and we've used that in wartime decades and decades and decades ago in Vietnam to try and flood out, the Vietnamese resistance, why now in 2026, we would not have the capability to do the exact opposite, right? To prevent rain, to prevent rainfall, snowfall, these sorts of things. You'd have to be so gullible, so full of it, if you honestly believe that. Yeah, someone says, what's next? Exploding pagers? Exactly. Everyone underestimates the power, the capability, and just how sinister these people are. That's probably the biggest mistake of all. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2 years of being
and not one that President Trump can control. First of all, let me show you something that was on Truth Social here just literally minutes ago. President Trump on Truth Social posted a couple things this morning. So it's important to show what he did, where his mind is. This is literally 41 minutes ago. First of all, he posted this exclusive. Israel's foreign minister praises Trump. Remarkable leadership. So again, we see this whole pattern is where he gets a lot of praise from the Israeli leaders, and he loves it. He fawns over that stuff, and he just feeds on it. So he's asked that. So that's the first thing he posted. Then right underneath that, we see Mark Levin. And this is something he posted right up. This is from Mark Levin last night. And you got to wonder, okay, well, first he praises Israel, or he accepts the praise from Israel. And then he goes into one of Israel's biggest voice boxes in the United States, Mark Levin, who has a large following on social media, as well as this Saturday show at Fox News. And so what was he saying that President Trump found so important that he posted it on here? Now, you may can see that President Trump provided no commentary, just posted it. But nevertheless, he posted it for a reason. This was the opening monologue on Levin's show last night. Now, he started off, you can see it's in 11 minutes, so I'm not going to show you all of it. I won't make you have to endure that. But what he talked about was that he said, listen, this whole thinking with Iran, you can't trust Iran. They've broken every deal that's ever existed. You just can't trust them. They have, but President Trump is incredible because he has destroyed their military. He has destroyed their economy. He said, but there's still one leg of this triumph that you need in order to win. He said, we should go after complete surrender. So he's going back to unconditional surrender, which President Trump said in the first week or so of the war, obviously never succeeded in getting done. But he said, we haven't finished. We have to destroy their knowledge. This whole thing about it all gets down to the nuclear program. And Mark Levin says, even if you get a deal, number one, you're not going to be able to trust them. Number two, you've destroyed their economy, you've destroyed their military, so he says, but you can't destroy their knowledge. So you're going to have to get rid of the regime. And then he says, how do you do that? He said, well, the first two legs were destroy the military, destroy the economy. And now he says, here's a third one.
And if you're not going to send in ground troops to destroy the regime, well, then what are you going to do? This is where I turn to more recent history and what I call the third leg of victory. In addition to the historic military and economic actions, there must be steps taken to destroy the regime internally. After all, the Iranian regime has an elaborate police state, an internal security force that is armed and well-trained and is critical to the revolution. In fact, the regime has been importing militia from Iraq and elsewhere to reinforce its internal security force. So what do we do about this? We can't defeat it from the skies. We can't defeat it from the seas. We can't defeat it alone by economically choking them off, even though some people have suggested that. The way we have dealt with this in the past, during the Reagan administration and as part of the Reagan doctrine, as I've explained here now 3 or 4 weeks in a row, is to train and arm the people. And in Iran, you have millions and millions of people who are desperate to overthrow the regime, who are courageous, tens of thousands who have died. What other proof do they have to provide?
Well, yeah. How about some actual evidence about what's real? Because there's nothing real about that. That's just something that you wish were true. That there's literally millions of people in Iran just waiting for you to come and give them weapons. We have seen the rally around the flag dynamic kick in like everybody knew that it would. Anybody who's paying any attention, and even these people, and we've had many on our show who were against the regime, are actually for it now because you have attacked their country writ large. And the idea that now then, more than 2 months into this, you want to go in and arm them, and so that they can be your ground force against their country and for the United States, the attacking United States and Israel. I mean, that is irrational to the highest degree. Well, that's not all President Trump put on there. Let me show you a couple of other things. Let me roll down here a little bit. Yeah, that weird stuff with the pool again. Then he has a lot of personal stuff that he likes to put on there, but this is weird too. I want to talk about that. Here's a couple things I want to point out there. The Iran's Navy. He loves to talk about this. I've sent them all to the bottom of the sea. So the whole Iran's Navy is at the bottom of the sea. and then some more personal stuff, and then this one here. And then he has an AI generated image of himself. This is not reposted from someone else. This is his, and he shows him there in the combat zone in the Persian Gulf, destroying Iranian speedboats as the perch on the bridge with a commander right next to a gun. So it's very brave, very dramatic, and very much nonsensical. But that's where his mind is, and that's what I'm trying to see. Well, where is the Iranian mind? Because they also have a viewpoint on this. And here is the national security spokesman. This is all this morning. Trump's best course is to surrender. So you see a hardening of the view on the Iranian side. He says, as of today, our restraint is over. Any aggression against our vessels will be met with a heavy and decisive Iranian response against American vessels and bases. The clock is ticking against the American interest. It is to their benefit not to act foolishly and sink themselves deeper into a quagmire they have fallen into. There was another member of parliament who also this morning says Iran has dragged the American and Israel into a maddening quagmire. You tried to open up the Strait of Hormuz and got slapped. The world must accept that it is facing a global power that will not yield to any pressure. The era of dictating terms is over. We will not surrender. So now then you have this issue to where the Iranian side is saying, no more. We're done with that. We've endured everything that you had. We still have control of the Strait of Hormuz. And that's the key thing here. Whatever President Trump is saying, whatever Mark Levin is saying, whether it's Lindsey Graham or General Keane or General Kellogg, Mike Pompeo, I saw him having more nonsense yesterday. They keep talking like we're in the driver's seat. If we were in the driver's seat, why is the Strait of Hormuz still closed? What does that tell you? That tells you that Iran is in control and we can't take it out. So we're trying everything we've tried. We've tried, bombardment, 40 days of bombardment. We've tried international isolation. We've tried to destroy their economy. We've tried to do everything. Nothing has worked. And now then, here's the response to Trump's talk about the Navy yesterday. The Iranian Navy has announced the deployment of its submarines to the Strait. And they have surfaced and took pictures to say, hey, we're in the Strait now. And if you're thinking you're going to come and get us, you're going to take us out, then you've got to understand there is a danger. So they're saying now they basically laid down a gauntlet. Are you going to test us now? Because we're ready to fire back. We're not giving up. We're not surrendering. We're going to get the terms we're looking for, or that strait is going to stay closed, and we're going to stay in charge of it. So we've got to find out who is going to blink and what path are we going to go down. Now, listen, if this was just a kind of a neutral situation, you had a standoff at OK Corral and, you got both sides staring each other down and ready to draw, it could go on potentially forever. But there's a clock that's ticking, and one that President Trump doesn't like, and one that is definitely antithetical to our interest if it continues to tick. Let me just bring this up here real quick and show you the one I'm talking about. It's just, this is a professor from Johns Hopkins, Steve Hanke, who was talking about the upcoming shortage of oil inventories. And this is a huge issue. We simply cannot continue going on with the strait closed, losing 12 to 14 million barrels of oil per day on the global market. And we're doing it by drawing down on strategic petroleum reserves all around the world. And so we're flooding the market with oil from these reserves to try to mitigate against that. And that has had some success so far. But as Professor Hanke says, don't count on that lasting much longer.
Even in the United States, by the end of July, if this keeps up, we'll run out of inventory. Right now, we're drawing down inventory. That's, shall we say, kind of cushioning the blow, so to speak. But when the oil inventories run out, then you have a real shortage, and the price will really spike.
And see, that's the whole issue right there. A lot of this is artificially kept down right now. President Trump is great at manipulating the markets. I've been showing you all how that's going on. Somebody's making billions of dollars. On the one hand, that's illegal by itself. But just on the other hand, to calm the public service, they're showing people, hey, you know what? Everything's fine. It's a little high, but it's no big deal. It's going to be going down soon. That's what he wants. But until he gets that strait open, that's not possible, because we are rapidly drawing down even our strategic petroleum reserves. And when that happens, then you won't have anything to balance off the loss from the Persian Gulf, and the price will spike. whether you want it to or not. It's a global commodity. It's not anything. He can't control the physical price of it. And when there is a physical shortfall, that's the key. There simply won't be enough gas and oil and products and fertilizer and helium and aluminum. There won't be enough of it to go around. And in fact, some of those, there already isn't enough. There's already significant damage already caused. But it's pretty soon, the facade is going to come off too. So what is going to happen? Now, we know for sure there's a lot of people that are begging Trump to go back to the military. Well, let's try that. Maybe that'll work again. You see Mark Levin, let's put people in there. Let's arm them. Let's let that be a boots on the ground. That is a fantasy. That won't work. It will not work. You may sponsor, because I'm sure like the MEK, for example, they would probably love to have weapons and they could probably start something, but they're a small scale. So it'll be periphery. There's like over, I think the army itself is over 1 million in Iran, but now then it's swelled up to several million for people who have been mobilized or volunteered to come and serve. So whatever the MEK is, whatever this small group, whether it's Kurds or somebody else, and I doubt you'll get even that, it's a tiny little drop in the bucket like everything else we've tried. It won't work. So we still keep circling back. The only thing that has any prospect of avoiding the worst outcomes is the walk away theory. But you see, President Trump is not setting himself up for that. He's still talking like he can go in with a hammer and finally just, bury that nail in the wood. Only it's not going to work. We tried the hammer and it didn't work. It backfired. And if you go in and try it again, all you're going to do is get more people killed and deepen the cost profoundly. I don't think we should assume that the Iranians are bluffing here, that they won't attack our ships with torpedoes. They haven't even tried that yet. Or swarm tactics. They haven't tried that either. Or that they'll hit the oil infrastructure of our allies, more on our bases, more on Israel, cause harm to everybody we say we care about. That's what happens if we don't do the walk away theory. Any other version will harm the entire global economy. And of course, that means ours along with it and all of our allies. Everybody that we love is going to get harmed if we keep going down this path. That's where we are right now, folks. We'll continue if there's any breaking news, if the Iran returns anything later today, or if President Trump makes any more statements or anything happens, you can.
It's more the general staff, the defense ministry, the groups of forces, the Security Council at the center of the political system. And again, the feel of it is very, very different. Now, I'd like to discuss all this and to compare these two wars and to look at where each of them is going. And I cannot imagine anybody better to do that with than Stanislav, who has close familiarity with both militaries in the sense that he served in the one and he has many acquaintances and knowledge of the other. So, firstly, Stanislav, welcome to this program. But secondly, am I right in saying that there is a fundamental difference, and it's a difference of character, and that it goes beyond the person of the President of the United States? There does seem to be a major difference in the style of war, the way of war that these two militaries have. Am I right in this? And then maybe we can unpack this a little bit more detail.
Alexander, you're absolutely right. I would add, I would slightly correct you. There isn't two wars, there's three wars. Because what's been flying under radar, and I've done, I'm about to put out a big article and the Russian media on it. and I've done an update on this, is the war in Africa, which is an extension. You could call it an extension, but it's a very different war. It's not just Mali, it's also Niger. They've been attacked. Niger was attacked first. Mali was invaded by 12,000 separatists and Islamic jihadists with American and French backing on the one side, and lots of Ukrainians, because they've also published photos of themselves training and holding Islamic jihadist flags, because they like to do that. They like to brag. On the other side is the Russian military. And this is, granted, it's a former, a lot of these guys are former Wagner, but the Russian African Corps is active duty Russian military. They're all contracted with the military, the Department of Defense, and they've been upgraded a lot since Wagner. They've had heavy equipment brought in, a lot of it. And there's lots of Russian military all over that place. And it's not just two separate powers. Burkina Faso also sent troops instantly over to Mali to help assist Mali in holding off the invasion. And the Russian troops are in the middle of it. They're the sturgeon on which all the defense has been built. They've been upgrading the Malian military, all the Sahel militaries. So we're really looking at 3 theaters already, and they may be growing, especially depending on what happens May 9th. I'll be there on the parade with RT. So if something hits, I'll be there videotaping. I guess so you can have it directly from me if we're all still alive the next day. So there's that. When it comes to military, yes, I'm very close with the Russian military. I actually, when mobilization hit, I requested a military commission as an officer. Had a couple of generals backing me, but the military they turned it down. Well, and you could say. They said we have enough officers for now, is what they came back with. And you could say that, okay, I was a U.S. Military officer, maybe they don't trust me or something like that. But the key here is I have a lot of friends that are retired Soviet and retired Russian military from the 90s. Officers, all, mid-ranking senior officers, they all wanted to come back, and they were all told the same thing. We have enough officers. Your time hasn't come yet.
My heart's fine.
I'm only 40. Ignoring your heart health risk is no way to go through the war.
And the key being your time, and this was in 22, 23. And to read that is, at least, if not the political class, then the military class is already planning for the big war with Europe. They've recognized that there's a very good chance that this is all going to snowball effect into an avalanche that's going to drive war. So the officers that are more experienced, they're keeping them in reserve for when the big mobilization has to hit. Military is obviously every single military in the world that's worth anything, including obviously the U.S. military. They will game play different scenarios. The U.S. military has game plans for every nation, for alien invasions, for zombie apocalypses, and people laugh at that. But what you're really doing is you're exercising the staffs to come from different angles and think of new problems or solutions to problems that you normally wouldn't think. A million zombies are heading your way. They're not going to stop. What do you do? Okay, what do you plan? You start planning logistics. It's an exercise. It's a mental exercise that can later on be used in different other scenarios that are real life scenarios or real life. But the approach between the Russian military and the American military, it is very different on a professional level, in that in the U.S. it's the art of war. And I think that comes more from Clausewitz and that school of thought, and into the art of war. So what the art of war says is you learn what the great military leaders have done, how they've thought. You try to figure out Napoleon's thinking on a strategic theater, tactical level, because it's an art. And in the end, it all depends on the person more so than on the system. The Russian approach is the science of war. There's full academies for this. It's yes, the individual commander is important. Yes, his abilities are very important, but those abilities are built upon a scientific approach. How do you organize logistics? How do you organize defenses? You don't wing it. You actually have a science behind it. What's worked? What hasn't worked? And because of that, the system is less flexible maybe than the Western system or the American system. But it's very quick at learning lessons. You survive any kind of setback. You learn from that setback. You dissect it. You do lessons learned, much more so than you do from an American point of view. Lessons learned. You look at it at the minimal details of what went wrong, and you don't repeat. While from the American side, you may wind up repeating in a slight variation over and over and over again. A prime example is Bora Bora. Or is it Tora Tora? I can't remember. I get those two mixed up. The one in Afghanistan. If you look at what was done when they went after bin Laden in the small mountain range, every single mistake the U.S. military has ever done before, it repeated. To and include, if anybody has ever seen or read the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and the movie with, let's see who was in that. That was Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah, I think so. Well, whichever, right. When the 110th, or I'm sorry, 101st Airborne became 101st Air Assault, so they're helicopter borne. And what they did was they flew a brigade right into the middle of a division of Viet Cong in a valley, and they're surrounded.
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson. Yep, you're right. You're absolutely right, Mel Gibson. So, and what do they find? Yes, we have the enemy where we want them. They're all around us. We're surrounded. We can shoot in any direction. They're all in there, but so can they. That was a catastrophe that barely got saved by the sacrifice of a lot of helicopter pilots and a lot of luck. Because the enemy, first they're in shock, and then they go, "Wait a minute, is that it? Oh, we surround them. Yeah, they can't get out. They're trapped." Well, the U.S. military did the exact same thing. They repeated every single mistake. 101st Airborne or Air Assault brings in a brigade, drops it in the middle of the mountains, and now they're surrounded by the Mujahideen / Al Qaeda / whomever else is up there. Every mistake you would think that they would have learned, because it goes back more to the commander than to the science of it. So yes, the U.S. is more flexible, but they tend to create a lot of stupid mistakes over and over again because it's not learned as a science. What you do and you don't do. And the Russian approach is much more systematic. We're supposed to be the low skill knuckle dragging barbarians according to the Western press, but the Russian approach has always been a very technical, very scientific approach to just about everything.
There's a big article which perhaps illustrates this very thing that you just said. I think it was in the New York Times about Russian adaptation to drone warfare and how the Russians have gone about reorganizing their drone warfare capabilities and have built up a huge industry and whole science around the use of drones, and have done this incredibly fast and done it upgraded by scale. And the very pragmatic and empirical way in which it's been done, in the sense that you look at what works and then you just build on it rather than sort of try and conceptualize it ahead. So it seems to me that it plays exactly to the point that you just made, that this is a structured approach rather than one that looks to try and wing your way through it, and which sort of tries to find some inspirational solution to a problem. You actually sit down, you think, you have obviously the planning staffs to do it, and you approach it in that way. Does this have anything to do with Marxism? I get to ask that straight away, because the Soviet systems that we were all talked about, it was all supposed to be very much based on Marxism. And the Soviet Union's approach to war was founded on, thinking of people like Engels, or is it a pre-Soviet thing that extends back to the way the Russians have always waged war?
I'll answer this right now, but I also want to go back to the drones because I just came back for the Donbass, and it's very important. Exactly, this is exactly where I was at meeting and seeing issues with the drones. So okay, so the approach. I know everybody likes to think history in Russia started in 1917. It didn't. It started somewhere in the 800s, the late 800s. Actually, the written history. Pre-Russian history was way longer than that. The Northern Slavs, at least 1,000 years before that, according to DNA analysis from the various remains of the Kurgans, R1A Hopla group. But this approach started with Peter the Great. So when they started copying, they didn't just blindly copy Western European approaches. They set up committees. Just about for everything. And they went about it in a very scientific approach, putting in, getting as much information as they could, putting in reports, then reviewing them, and trying to come at this at a technical, scientific approach. Sometimes it took a lot longer. Sometimes it didn't work. But the mentality was already there. So did the Soviets enforce it? Probably did, even more so. But this was part of Tsarist Russia. This was part of Imperial Russia. And it became part of Soviet Russia, and it's part of modern Russia. It's been a traditional approach for the last 350 years, if not longer. And really, if you read some of the history of prior to Peter the Great, that there's already these approaches of expert committees looking at different situations, looking at cannon use that started. I mean, Russia was one of the leading powers in the use of cannons back under Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Feared, Ivan the Fourth. This is the mid 1500s, and in fact, that turned several battles against the various Mongol khaganates in the south. So this was a very scientific approach that has continued to be used. And drones, well, so I came back Monday evening from the Donbass. And I was visiting several units. I'm not going to say which or where they're located, but they are now reorganized as drone battalions and drone regiments. What happened before that is, and still to a degree is, but it's in the stage of transformation, reorganization, is everybody had their own drone section. So every assault company may have like two guys doing drones. A battalion might have, a couple of sections here and there doing drones, and so on and so on. And there's lots of different drone missions. I'm not talking about strategic level drones, Garans, or any of these larger drones. And though Ukraine is hitting with airplane type drones deep into Russia, Russia can do the same thing. It's just not doing it because it doesn't need to right now. Because if it needs to go against the European Union, it can build those drones very, very quickly. It's building shorter range drones because it only needs to hit, at the moment anyways, to the western border of Ukraine. So that's what the Garan 3s, the Garan 2s are being used because it just doesn't need to go any further. And by the way, those drones are now very pilotable at the distances of Odessa, and not just at pre-programmed locations. They were taking out Odessan vessels that were trying to flee out of the port. And they were zeroing in on them. So it's either artificial intelligence or the new satellite systems or something else that are bouncing a signal off, and they're controlling them in real time to go against moving targets, not just fixed targets that you can put on a internalized map. So, but the small drones, the tactical drones, you have several very different, distinct missions involved. You have recon. You have bombing missions where they drop grenades or other explosive instruments onto targets. You have the kamikaze drone missions, which are one-offs. You have resupply missions, so there's drones that drop equipment, food, and so on. So these are very different drone missions, and they use different types of drones, even though they more or less, they kind of look the same, but the guts and the setup are different. The problem is until now, you would have these kinds of orders coming down to every single drone section from whatever commander's there. Oh, we need to do this today, tomorrow we need to do this, and 10 minutes later we need to do this. And it requires very different equipment and to some degree different training, obviously. So it put a lot of strain and a lot of inefficiency in the system. A lot of it had to be repeated over and over again, capabilities at all of these units. So now they've gone to a reorganization where they're going now into battalion level and regiment level drone units, where you have dedicated units for resupply. You have dedicated units for kamikaze attacks or bombing missions. You have dedicated reconnaissance units. Because the other thing is, these guys, they'll carry these drones with them out into the field. They get as far as they can, particularly if they're using kamikaze drones. You need to get really far ahead. So they'll carry what they can. So they can't just switch over to reconnaissance that easily because the cameras are totally different. You know, you've got information acquiring packages on there that are absolutely different. On a kamikaze, whether it's going by fiber optics or whether it's going by radio signal, you still have minimal camera use because you don't need very, very detailed photos from a height when you're zooming in on an enemy tank or enemy personnel to destroy them. So it's a different approach. So now you're coming with that organized scientific approach. And the other thing that's interesting is, even though there are major manufacturers in Russia for the FPV, different kind of FPV drones, they have drone laboratories up front. And they, with 3D printers, everything's equipped. They can come up with whatever drone model that hits their fancy, right? You get a crazy idea, you go back in there, you describe it to the guys sitting behind the printers. They do a 3D model or modify the existing 3D model. They pump one out. You put it together relatively quickly. Most everything is printed or soldered on the spot, and you go test it. So your turnaround period becomes much, much faster than having engineers in Moscow or in, somewhere in Belgorod or wherever else they may be sitting. And I'm not saying they're sitting there, but they could be sitting there or whatever other part of Russia they're sitting, going, hey, let's make an idea deal. Then we shipped it out there and then we test it, because once the enemy sees it, they're going to react and they're going to modify. And it's a continuous modification run. It's a continuous cycle. So the technology advancement and modification is extremely fast. We're talking very short technology cycles. What's good for now, maybe in 6 months, it's pointless. Nobody's using it anymore. It's much faster than it was in World War I and World War II. And that was pretty fast technology models. I mean, World War I, you started with the hot air balloons and ended with bombers, with 4-engine Ilya Muromets bombers bristling with machine guns in every direction that the Germans wouldn't even go up against them. So they get shot down. You went from that to that in a matter of 4 years. Here, the technology cycle is even faster, much faster. So yes, they're coming at us very scientifically. They're totally reorganizing. There's a huge drive for people, and you know, the interesting thing is, it's a career move, because not only you're serving the country and defense, you're building the skill set from design to operation of drones, that once peace comes, and hopefully we're still alive and it's not the peace of the grave or nuclear peace, hopefully, technology moves forward, these people will have very good career opportunities, because drones are here to stay in the civilian market too, for obvious reasons. So yeah, it's become a very organized, very structured move forward.
I've actually heard it described that Rubicon is Russia's leading tech company at the moment.
Yep.
And that's been. Now, can you just tell us something else about drone warfare? Because there's a certain degree of commentary which is on the Ukrainian side by people who are very critical of Ukraine's way of using battlefield drones, that the Ukrainians overemphasize killing Russian infantry with their drones, whereas the Russians see drones primarily as useful to disrupt logistics, Ukrainian logistics and supplies. And I've read many commentaries from various Ukrainian commentators who say that the Russian approach is ultimately far more effective. Did you hear anything about that whilst you were there in Donbass?
Yes, there's several key points here. First of all, Ukraine has to compensate for men and lack of trained men. A friend of mine, he used to be in storm infantry. He is now on the cleanup crews. So Kupins, by the way, has fallen. He was just in Kupins before he got transferred to a different unit. Kupins has fully fallen. There's a couple of buildings on the very edge, and the forest past Kupins, the Ukrainians are still holding. And they were trying to make up manpower losses, and their catastrophic manpower losses with drones to try to hold the Russian infantry in place with drones. And when I say cleanup crews, he went from he got injured when he was in the storm infantry. So they transferred him after he recovered from his injury, shrapnel injury. They clean up the corpses. He said, on a static piece of battlefield just south of Kupins, where you'd think that it went back and forth several times, but you would think that the casualties would be equivalent or something close to equivalent, especially since Russia in the end pushed the Ukrainians out. And the Ukrainians are on defensive, you'd think there'd be a lot more Russian casualties. He said 10-1. He was shocked. Just the Ukrainian casualties, the corpses were just literally stacked on top of each other. They were just falling in the same places, in the same areas, and they're cleaning that up. They're 10-1. So it's not just the matter Russia is advancing, even on a more static battlefield. That's what it's hitting. And they're throwing people in. Another friend of mine was telling me when he was on defensive positions up in Kursk, not Kursk, I'm sorry, in the Kharkov Oblast, they had a 2-kilometer open field in front of their positions. Ukrainians would just drop off, and we were discussing how they were moving. So from the way they were moving, it's obvious these guys had zero training. They were told which end of the rifle was the business end of the rifle. That's it. Now go scream hurrah for Ukraine, glory to heroes, and go die. And they were bringing them up in huge numbers. These press gang meat. That's all they are to the Ukrainian leadership, and charging them across a 2-kilometer field. It's like, we barely ever fired on them. The artillery took them all out. They would make it halfway across the field before they would be wiped out. So from that point of view, the Ukrainians, all they have is mass drone warfare. The Russian approach to drone warfare has changed too, and I'll go back to Ukrainian in a second too, because there's an element that everybody's missing. On one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are acting the way they're acting. The Russian approach has always been, take out the equipment. Now the deep equipment hits, the logistic hits, are now done by the latest generation of Garan drones, which can be piloted can be either autopiloted or piloted by the actual operator somewhere remotely in a different city. They don't have to be anywhere near the base because they're bouncing off the satellites, and they can be used to strike moving targets in 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers out. So you'll get a Garan drone hunting down a truck, for example. You can do that. It's a little expensive, but deep enough. It happens deep enough that you can't get the FPV drones that far in. Russia has usually targeted technology over personnel, but war makes people mean, and it gets them meaner. For a lot of the drone operators, the emphasis has changed. They're targeting, unless it's something that's very key, they're now targeting the Ukrainian personnel first and foremost. And that's more of a revenge thing for what the Ukrainians do, especially what the Ukrainians do to civilian population. Now, from the Ukrainian side, ever heard of gamification? The Ukrainian units are literally, you gamify everything. When you play a game on a telephone, these fast games. The key in those games is at least every 3 to 5 seconds, something pops up, some little point, you get awarded some little point, you get that little bit of dopamine rush. And that is the gamification of something. Anything you do, that's the design model of the last several years, is to get mini dopamine rushes. That's what TikTok is based off of, why teenagers get addicted to watching 10-second or 15-second videos that are pointless, but they get a little dopamine rush. It's gamification. They get the bonus point. Well, the Ukrainian battalions or the Ukrainian drone operators, their units on different levels of their units, from companies to sections up to battalions, they're all on a gamification. They get points per strike. They earn these points as a unit, and then they get swag. They buy, they get, and they can spend these units at the end of the month on the internet. They order new trikes for themselves, or new motorcycles, or new other gear, and they get it. They actually will get it. So the motivation is you got to kill something. So if you've got no military targets, civilians also get your points. Less points, but they get your points. So they will always go after somebody. Look, I did. 1 second. I did an update. I haven't put it out yet, but part of my update for yesterday. This is typical on the Russian on this battlefield. Actually, it's not on the battlefield. This was civilian casualties for yesterday on the Russian side, and this happens every single day. The town of Zhukhanku. I'm butchering the name. I got to look it up exactly where it's located. I think it's in the. In the edge of the Caucasus. 5 civilians killed. Bryansk, 1 civilian killed, hit on a house. Logov, which is a village in Kursk, 2 civilians injured, hit on a gas station while they were fueling. Belgorod Oblast, 1 civilian killed, 3 injured. That's every single day. They can't find military targets, so they can't approach military targets because they have protection. They go after civilians to earn points so they can get swag. That's the gamification on the Ukrainian side, the psychological gamification of this war. Which is, by the way, why the Ukrainian drone operators don't get taken as prisoners.
I've heard it. I've heard it said that this approach of basically paying operators for the number of kills they achieve, that the other thing it is doing is encouraging massive inflation in terms of the numbers of soldiers, Russian soldiers, and that they say that they've killed, and that this is one of the factors that is distorting understanding in the West. I mean, is that right?
Yes, and then there's the NATO kill tables. Ever heard of the NATO kill tables? Okay, so on a strategic or theater level operation, you have quite literally. Now, this is hangover from the Cold War, where you're supposed to have these gigantic battles, and you're firing thousands of rounds of artillery in the first days on all the fronts as the Red Horde comes rolling over the valiant NATO defenders. We know the scenarios. It's been gamed all over the place, and computer games and television shows and so on. Well, there's no, especially back then without drones, there was no way that you can estimate what you're actually killing. So NATO came up, and the U.S. military has these and used to use them. Came up with kill tables. So you look at the weapon system. Say you're firing 155 millimeter howitzers, and you fired. You go across, and it's a table. It's quite literally a table. So you're fighting a infantry brigade, right? And you fired off 100 rounds in a square in a square kilometer or 2 square kilometers. You go across 155 millimeter. How many rounds you fired? And you look what the table tells you. You should have killed 200 infantry, 5 BMPs, and so on. And they quite literally use these tables, at least they used to at the beginning of this conflict, to come up with the death rates of the Russian military. Were they based in any kind of actual factual information, or even to the concept of how this conflict was being fought? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But they were used, and this is why you got these giant, wild numbers of 12,000 Russian tanks destroyed by 2024, and 30,000 BMPs and other vehicles and so on. They're just pulling this off of the tables. How many shots did we fire? Okay, so if we fired 300 155 millimeter shots, or we fired so many MLRS short-range rockets, now we should have killed this, and this. And that goes into reporting. We killed this. And quite literally, that's where a lot of this statistics was coming from. It's idiotic. It has absolutely no concrete concept in modern warfare, at least the modern warfare as we're seeing it right now, because it was based off of giant kill ratios that should have happened when the entire Red Army with all the Warsaw Pact countries comes rolling over. So we can approximate what we've killed. but they were used, and they may still be getting used in some areas.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. Let's go back to the command and control systems and the way in which war is fought, because of course what you say is actually very interesting. That on the one hand you have commanders who are playing Napoleon, being exaggerating, but that's what they're
No,
doing.
it's not. You're not. You're not.
And on the other hand, on the other side, you have basically a much more systematic, almost like a kind of machine war. Now, does that explain something which I think a lot of people find very difficult to understand, which is why the Russians are fighting this war in this particular way, why they're not going for particular knockout blows in the kind, grand strategic plans of, the kind of, they're not trying to do an Austerlitz, for example.
Right.
They are taking everything very systematically and very methodically, be it, a place like Konstantinovka or in Liman or wherever. It's unspectacular, it's not dramatic, but it is remorseless. And it means that when you finally take the territory, once you've consolidated, you keep it. So does this explain one of the differences, that in the West, we are always looking for this, grand tactics, this brilliant, inspirational general who's going to achieve this tremendous knockout victory, whereas this isn't what the Russians do at all. If you could just talk to that a bit.
Yeah, the problem, if we were going to look at it honestly, there is no Austerlitz for the last 120 years. Those moments, and one could probably say they started to fade out with the Franco-Prussian War, because even though the Franco-Prussian War had some very key battles that helped crush the French army, nowhere did the French army fully just collapse. You didn't have, you no longer have Austerlitz, you no longer have Borodino, you don't have these kinds of battles where you may be wagering the entire future of your entire nation on one battle. Simply put, too many men, too long of a front, as we saw in World War I, as we saw even on the Eastern Front, which was relatively a mobile front compared to the West, which is all trench. The Eastern Front was relatively mobile. It still had a lot of trench warfare in it, but it was just too big. World War II, you had major losses like Stalingrad, just as an example, that did not crush the German army. Kursk did not crush the German army. It was a major setback. It was a major loss, but the front continued fighting because it was just too big now. So it's the same thing in here. Any one city, any one major victory, but the front is over 1,200 kilometers long. And even if a portion of the front collapses and starts retreating, doesn't mean everybody starts retreating. Communications themselves, by the time you find out that, they're retreating up north where, somewhere around Kharkov, and we're sitting down in Zaporozhye, it's been 3 days. We're still holding our own because we're not being surrounded. So it's a whole different scale, absolutely whole different scale. Naval battles could still be something of that sort. I guess I'm not a naval officer. I've read naval history and some strategy, but I'm no stratagem for naval battles. But on the ground, no, it's impossible now for countries the size of what we're talking about. Now, if we're talking smaller nations that don't have the larger militaries, yes, one big battle could decide the fate of a small nation. But then again, the frontage is different, the amount of men is different, everything's different. But even if we look at the Paraguayan war, where almost 50% of the manpower was killed, that war
fought in the middle of the 19th
attrition.
century. Just to make
Right.
sense, fought in the middle of the 19th century, just for
Right.
those who don't know about it.
Exactly. One of the things that the American and the Union and the Confederate generals were accused of during the American Civil War is all of them wanted to be Napoleon, but none of them had the capability to follow through. So they could defeat their enemy on the battlefield, but they couldn't run them down and destroy them. So the enemies would, even though there was very successful definitive battles that destroyed one or heavily damaged, they never destroyed any armies, heavily damaged one army, the other, they'd retreat, regroup, and then go at it again. There was never this definitive conquest. Even that really was already going out the window with Napoleon. I mean, the days where, one warlord lined up his 500 or 1,000 men against men at arms and knights against another, and they fought it out, and that could be the end of one kingdom or another, they're done. And they're never going to come back on a large scale. So there's that. And that makes a very different approach. But, if you look at these major battles, we can start with Snake Island, which is, there may be some Ukrainians sitting there. It's I think nobody's sitting there now. It's a very pointless piece of land, but it was a PR battle, and that was being organized by the British versus Kursk, and Zaporozhye, Rabotina was organized by the Americans and planned out. But what I mean by organized, I mean literally it was.
All right, what's the most valuable thing you can do as a trader? I would argue the single most valuable thing you could do is find one high conviction trade that you feel good about placing. See, so many people spend all this time on analysis and watch lists and tools. They don't really arrive on a trade they feel good about on a regular basis. So it's all just kind of wasted at the end of the day. I built a tool that's designed from the ground up, scanning every stock, every option, millions of combinations to land on the best opportunity every day. You could actually try that tool for free. That's how good it is, that I think if you try it for free for about 30 days, you'll be begging me to continue using it, to be perfectly honest with you. And all you have to do is click the ad on this little video, wherever that button is. It'll take you to a presentation where I show you exactly how this tool works, why it works, how to get the best opportunities every day based on the criteria that I built in, and how to try it for free, no credit card required, 30 days of access. And I think after that, you'll absolutely love it. You see, I built this tool because, like a lot of traders, I have lots of ideas, I have lots of watch lists, I like lots of different stocks, but at the end of the day, I still need to narrow down what is my best opportunity today. And what this tool does is it scans thousands of stocks using strict criteria. It tells me what are the best, most stable stocks of the day. And then, way better than that, it scans through millions, and I do mean millions, of option combinations to not just say, okay, here's a stock you can trade, but here's the exact high conviction option trade that gives you the best opportunity right now today. Now, when you see exactly kind of the phenomenon behind this, you'll understand I'm not just talking about, hey, here's an option you can buy, hopefully the stock goes up. Not that at all. In fact, the way that we trade, we actually trade stocks where it can go up, which we want, but it could go sideways. It can even go against us a little bit, and we're still going to win the trade in most cases. Now, obviously, nothing's perfect. Winners and losers come. You guys all know the drill. But when you see how powerful this tool is, how it works, how it isolates these particular trades, again, not just a stock, but the exact option criteria, the exact price to pay, the exact expected ROI, everything about it, all laid out for you with
the battle was planned. The Ukrainian generals are just the executive branch. They're the execution portion. They don't make any of the plans. They just follow through on them or not follow through on them. And there were a lot of people that were lost on Snake Island. You look at the approaches the British were playing. They were just playing with people because it's not their people. And they're not going to be punished if it's a failure. Yeah, let's experiment. So, okay, a couple hundred guys get killed here, a couple hundred guys get killed there. It's not our people. It's not going to really reflect on my career. I'm learning. And Kursk, if you look at it, same thing. If you look at it from a strategic point of view on a big picture, nobody would have gone into Kursk. Kursk was an idiot move. It was a good PR move at first for a month or so, but until the front stabilized. But it was an absolute idiot move. They never took more than 15% of Kursk. Okay, so except for maybe going after a nuclear power plant and committing nuclear terrorism, what good were you going to do? Those forces were incapable of even reaching Kursk City. And if you even got that, the most you can hope for is an internal Russian political collapse. And that was like betting on one of these mega lotteries that, that gives you the 1 in a billion chance of winning, which is basically the same thing. And you pulled up your deep reserve into a kill sack, into a giant kill sack. So anybody who looked at it from the side would have gone, no, this is stupid. This is absolutely idiotic. This is not going to get you anywhere except for a few good PR pictures for a while until it turns bad PR. But it was planned. It was executed as the swaggered, we're going to march into Russia and we're going to make glory and all that. And it ended, it ended as it could never have ended any other way. except the total extermination of the forces that went in there. And they should have pulled out of there when they saw that set. We can't move forward. You put up some blocking forces and you get the hell out. We've raided Russia. They could have saved some, but no, it was, they held to the end and they died in the end. And now Russia is moving on to Sumy, and Sumy is going to be the next big battle. Russian forces in the north of Sumy are less than 10 kilometers outside the city limits. I mean, it's a nice afternoon walk, quite literally at this point. So, and that all goes back to Kursk, right? Because they weakened themselves so much, 80,000 dead, and I don't know how many wounded, that they didn't have a capability of holding off anymore. But Russia is approaching this in a very systematic move for now. But I'll tell you this. The age, I'm not going to say drones are ever going to leave. They're not going to leave. They're part of the battlefield. But the age of drone prominence may be coming to an end, much quicker than most people understand. There's been a lot of systems, anti-drone systems have come out. Everything from shotgun blasts and net shots down up to lasers. Russia, China, America, because America wound up shooting a party balloon on the Mexican side of the border with a laser. Yeah, they've got the laser system. You just can't tell the difference between a drone and a party balloon. But which only confirms they do have the laser systems. Lasers are great. They melt right through these drones in less than a second. But the problem is they can only service one target at a time. If you have one target, you're great. If you are being swarmed by 30 or 40 drones and coming from a wide area approach, you can't service those targets, and the destruction of one of those lasers is pretty expensive. So everything you've had right now has been point defense systems. You can service one target at a time. With drone warfare, you need an area defense system. And the Chinese have just come up. The only thing that can do this, really, because once Russia came up with the fiber optics, and of course Ukraine did copy that. And we see fiber optics being used in Mali, by the way, by the Malian army with their drone warfare units that were set up by Russia. Once you've got that, you cannot block the radio signals. You can't do white noise. You can't jam them, because everything's going up the wire. But what you need is an area effect weapon that can do that, and that's called an electromagnetic pulse. Now, nuclear weapons, when they explode, the first thing they do is they release an electromagnetic pulse, which is a high energy, photons. Actually, they're not photons. I'm sorry. They're photons are light. They are it's high energy particles. I can't think of their name at the moment, unfortunately. But the high energy particles, they hit electronics and they hit wires. In fact, by the way, they do great jobs at destroying long distance, high voltage lines. We saw the solar flare back. Well, we saw our great grandfathers saw the solar flare in the 1880s that burned out most of the communications at that time across the northern hemisphere.
That's the sound of an American oil company hard at work. Want to be a part of it? Listen up.
Hello, my name is Adam Ferrari, and I'm the CEO.
It was just a solar flare. Does the same thing. It builds up an electric charge on the chips, and they burn out. So it doesn't matter, it's a radio signal or it's a fiber optic. Well, the Chinese have come up with this new system. It's a big it's a big microwave dish. It's a rectangular big microwave dish, fits on top of basically a Humvee sized vehicle. And has the inclination of -5 to 50 degrees. It covers about 180 degrees. So it's an area effect. The radar system that's built in can spot a cross section of 0.3 meters by 0.3 meters at 5 kilometers. Surrounding dependent, of course. If you're in a city area or you're in a heavy forest, it would be much less. But the fact is, and 0.3 meters is your average FPV drone. It's something about that big, flying at 5 kilometers. It can be picked up, and the whole area is microwave. So, yeah, birds will fall out of the sky. I've seen that happen on microwave dishes, communication dishes, and this is just on a bigger scale. Birds and insects will be dropping, but so will drones. I'm expecting that the Chinese have announced that they're field testing it in Chinese environments, but sooner or later it's going to go into field testing in Russia. That's guaranteed. So if this works as advertised, we could see a very rapid change in the battlefield.
I've actually, there was a report on TASS that Almas Ante, you know who they are, obviously, that they've actually been working on what sounded to me exactly the same kind of system. So it looks, I also think that this is coming, actually. Let's look at the other war, the one in the Persian Gulf, because I mean, there's lots of people who criticize the Russian war. They say it's very slow, the advance is very gradual. We have had 40 days of intense fighting in the Persian Gulf, huge expenditure of equipment, which has achieved what exactly? I mean, I'm asking you this question because it seems to me that this is the contrast. I mean, the one may be slow, but it's purposeful, and it is gradually moving forward. The other has used up apparently half the inventories, because that's what they're saying.
Oh, more,
what has
more.
it actually achieved?
Much more.
More. Okay. Well, tell us.
For the PAC-3s, Larry Johnson did a very good job on calculating the PAC-3s.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how many PAC-2s have been used up, but probably a very large quantity of PAC-2 Patriot missiles. Basically, the PAC-3s, we're looking about 90%. And the problem is, even though the military-industrial complex has promised Trump to triple production, go from 60 missiles to 180 missiles a month, so from maybe 30 targets to 90 targets, which still wouldn't cover one night in Ukraine. The problem is rare earth magnets. The purified form of the rare earths, which are all magnetic, are something the U.S. doesn't exactly produce much of. They've set up one plant. They produce an extremely high cost, very small amounts, not enough to feed the military-industrial complex. Everything comes from China, and obviously Bessett's doing his best to make sure the Chinese are as pissed off as humanly possible at the Americans, and Trump does his part too on that. So how are they going to build those? I don't know. That's a big question. What has it accomplished? Well, let's begin with, everybody started with General Milley. The Russians are going to take Kyiv in 3 days. That's where this myth started. Russia was never planning on taking Kyiv, because Russia made a very big mistake in thinking that it could, it almost succeeded until Johnson showed up, that it could just scare the Ukrainians and destroy the Ukrainian potential to invade the Donbass and scare them into being neutral. And they almost succeeded. And then Johnson shows up, and we know the history of that. So Russian plans went very askew, but they learned. It may be slower than most people. I was one of the people calling that we needed mobilization back in the summer, not in October. There's a lot of people, a lot of generals are calling we need mobilization now, not to wait. But the political side tried to still negotiate, and then finally came to the conclusion that this isn't going to work. We're losing because we quite literally do not have the manpower to hold the battlefield. We need more manpower. Russia learns systematically and adjusts. The U.S. literally came in with, this will be over by the end of the weekend. They were literally, I don't know what the generals were telling. We know Keenan at least told Trump, because it got leaked in the media, that we do not have the assets, even after they built up the assets, because Trump originally wanted January 16th, not February 28th. They brought in a lot more assets into the theater of operations, but Keenan, it got leaked that we were not going to accomplish anything. We don't have what we need. And that got ignored. And literally, they bought off on Netanyahu's fairy tale of 4 days or 3 days. We just killed the Khamenei, and it all collapses like a house of cards. The West loves the silver bullet approach to everything. We'll kill the werewolf with one silver bullet. It just never works, but they keep trying that, which I guess is the definition of insanity. Same thing under same conditions and expecting different results. But once that didn't work, what's the plan? Well, there is no plan. We're winging it. And what America always goes back to when it starts winging things is striking civilian population centers, mass casualties as much as possible to try to force the civilians, to force the government to surrender. It has never worked. It did not work in firebombing 5 million Germans to death and burning them in every single German city in Germany, not just Dresden like everybody remembers. It did not work firebombing the Japanese in one air raid on Tokyo. They killed 500,000 people. It did not work in Yugoslavia, even when they were hitting maternity wards and open air markets. It didn't work anywhere. It has never worked. People rally around the flag. They may not like the government, but they know who's killing them, and it's not their government. Nationalism skyrockets at this point. So no matter who you are, it's an internal issue, what I don't like about you or the way your policies, but that's the enemy that's trying to kill my kids and my family and my friends, and we're going to go fight them. That's the human mentality. It's always rally around your own, except for very few exceptions. And that's what they fell back on. But the problem is Iran has been getting ready for 20 years. So we've downgraded them by 30%, 80%, 90%. Trump said it very correctly. We've decimated them. You may have triple decimated them. So they may be down about 30% for the actual definition of that word. So maybe you triple decimated them, which means they still have 70% of capabilities fighting. They're buried under mountains, literally under mountains of granite that you would have to have several nuclear strikes to try to bury. They're inaccessible to the U.S. short of ground troops going in. And the U.S. physically does not have ground troops capable of doing this. Because one of the approaches of all this is called logistics. And logistics for the U.S. is a nightmare. Manufacturing for the U.S. is a nightmare. It cannot manufacture the supplies it needs to keep the people in the battlefield. And two, what we saw in Ukraine is still in effect. Amazingly, it's not just American satellites overhead. Not only do the Iranians have a few satellites of their own, but apparently there's Russian and Chinese satellites. And somebody may be leaking targeting information to the Iranians, apparently. That's hard to believe, I know. The U.S. could get proxied. And that's what we're facing. The U.S. may be, from the information I've gotten tonight, Trump may be restarting the bombing campaign. He's got a limited amount of missiles left. And I don't know what he could do with it, but I don't think they know what to do at this point. They're lost. They're grasping at anything and everything.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just finish with this question, because of course there's been a lot of discussion about the state of the war in Ukraine. Very, very quick rundown. What is going on? I mean, I was reading just before we did this program that the Ukrainians are retaking territory and that they're advancing in all sorts of places and that Moscow is in their sights. I'm not exaggerating slightly, but tell us what's happening. Maybe you could tell us a bit about, because this Battle of Konstantinovka, which I noticed that the media in Britain and the West is very careful to avoid talking about. There's now been an article in Reuters that has finally admitted that there is actually a battle going on there. But tell us a little bit briefly about where
there is a battle going on. They're a little late to the game, but never mind.
Well, no.
Yeah. In fact, after this video, I'm taking my shovel. I'm on the next work crew digging anti-tank trenches to stop the Ukrainians. It's our 5th or 6th line of anti-tank trenches we're digging. So we're preparing. Any day now they'll show up near Moscow. We've been waiting for 4 years. They're going to show up, and we'll be fighting them hand to hand. And then there's reality, and the reality is much less pleasant for the Ukrainian side. So what we've got, they are taking some areas back in a very limited format in Zaporozhye, which they've been counterattacking and getting counterattacked and counterattacking in Zaporozhye since, I guess about February, when all this started up relatively quickly and back and forth. And they're throwing everything they can because once Orekhova falls, there's really nothing to hold on to in Zaporozhye Oblast except Zaporozhye city itself. And that's pretty untainable. So they're doing counterattacks so much as they can, but outside of huge losses, so they don't have staying power because they use up so much of their forces to break into some area that then they can't dig in. They don't have the forces to dig in and hold. Now, going north of Zaporozhye, Russian forces, there's slow advance up and down in the Donetsk area, very limited in former Pokrovsk area. it's for that area, it's relatively limited because most of the fight is in Konstantinovka, and Konstantinovka is more than half in Russian hands, and the Ukrainians they've been holding off with drones. They don't have enough personnel. They've tossed everything they had in there. And one of the things, by the way, when we go back down to Zaporozhye, they gain ground by using their more elite units. The problem is they lose a lot of people in those elite units, so they can't reconstitute them fast enough. And then they pull those units back and they push in the press gang people. And the press gang people, they don't want to fight. They're not trained. They may not surrender. Surrendering is very dangerous because, by the way, those Ukrainian drone units also get points for killing their own guys if they're trying to surrender. And some of them are quite literally, as they're blocking you, all they do is they hover near their guys and wait for somebody to try to surrender to take them out and earn more points that way. It's very cynical. I mean, it's extremely cynical approach, but they will run. So these guys, when the Russian forces start approaching within hand grenade range, they're usually breaking and running for it, and maybe long before that. Because they're not trained, they're not motivated. We've seen photos of the guys that have been taken prisoner during combat operations. Pretty dangerous to try to surrender during active combat operations, obviously. Everybody's adrenaline's up. And I will tell you, they look like they've come out of concentration camps because they're not being fed. The logistics system is broken down, especially for these guys, the press gang guys. I mean, they're starved, they're skin and bones, bruised up. They look like crap. And to consider that these are your frontline troops, and that says a lot of the state of the military in Ukraine. Now, going back up, Konstantinovka is going to fall, but what's even more important is Krasny Liman has basically been cut off. They try to do some limited counterattacks inside Krasny Liman against Russian forces in Krasny Liman, which even if they're successful, again, it's relatively pointless because you're throwing away men you need on defensive on very limited tactical objectives on the offensive that you then can't hold anyways. So you may be buying yourself a couple of days or a day or less at the expense of guys that you cannot replace. The main route of supply to Krasny Liman is fully under Russian drone and artillery and aviation control. So nothing gets in, nothing gets out for the most part. And then getting across the Oskol River is pretty difficult. We've seen the Ukrainians claim successful counterattacks from Sumy on down with these videos. But if you look at the videos like Sumy, for example, they had some Miropolye. They had some videos that come out that they've counterattacked and taken back the village. But then you look at the tree line.
We were planning our anniversary trip. Someone tried to open a loan in my name in a state I've never even been to before.
Retirement is just around the corner. I don't have time to deal with identity theft. Fortunately for me, LifeLock caught it fast.
And there's no leaves on the trees. I just came back from there. It's all green. So these videos came out 3 days ago. They've retaken it. And you look at the trees. So when did you take those videos? About February? When the snow, or early March when the snow melted off. There's been very limited snowfall in a lot of those areas. So the trees haven't greened yet. Everything's absolutely green down there right now. It's basically almost summertime temperatures already. So you'd see these videos. So it's PR stunts. But the point is, so that area is taken. Kupiansk is gone. And the problem for the Ukrainians with Kupiansk, they're still holding on to force on the edges of Kupiansk, but that's very limited. They don't have the manpower. Russia is moving. So we're looking at the northeastern section of Kharkov Oblast or province. So you have the Serebryanka River coming down, and then you have Kupiansk on this side. And there's a big river. There's a big water reserve and this is just the east of Kharkov. What the Russian forces are going to do is they're going to break out, and they're going to charge across to the water reserve. And that fully cuts off northeastern Kharkov Oblast. And any Ukrainian soldiers in that area are screwed. I mean, they're logistically cut off fully. It'll take a while to clear them out, but unless they're going to try to run and then run 100 kilometers and then swim across a swollen river, they're screwed. They're not getting provision. They're barely getting provision as it is. They'll be fully cut off. So that area, Russia's already buffered in from every direction in that area. I think that area is going to fall relatively quickly now that Kupiansk is done. Kupiansk was the linchpin for that. But that will bring the Russian forces on the east within about 30 kilometers of Kharkiv. And Russian forces in the north of Kharkiv is now starting to move forward all along the borderline. But I think the big battle is coming first in Sumy. Russian forces are moving in from the east, but they're still about 30 kilometers away from Sumy in the east. But in the north, they're 10 kilometers out. That's an afternoon walk. That's a light afternoon walk. That's 6 miles for the Americans. They may be watching this and are standard system bound. That's not a far walk. Russia is in the middle of the second line of defensive belts. There is no third line except the city itself. The city is wide open. It's home to about in peacetime. It's home to about 250, 300,000 people. It's flat. It's open, but it is a nexus of logistics, including down to Kharkiv. So once that's taken, you further cut off Kharkiv from the east. Logistically wise, you've limited the amount of bridges and roads that can be taken, and you open up Chernigov next, and after Chernigov is Kiev. Never mind Kiev coming from across the Russian from Bryansk into Chernigov. So this could be. It doesn't look like it at first, but this could be a very linchpin operation to take Sumy. And once those areas beyond Sumy are not built up, there are no defensive lines, and the Ukrainians have proven that they have limited scope of what they can bring into the area. And from the Russian side, it's about a division and a half fighting this battle. If Russia, now to remember this, there are over 350,000 Russian troops in the near reserve. They're being rotated, battalions are being rotated in for a couple months, get combat experience, rotate back out, reconstituted. But there's over 350,000 troops that are not directly involved in these combat operations. It's 2 tank armies, basically. If they get tossed in large scale, sure, you will take lots of casualties at first as you're breaking through, but the collapse of a front line will more than make up for it. And if this microwave technology is a go, then your big aero movements are back. Because once you can suppress drones in an area, you have 5, 6 of these vehicles driving, taking the birds and the electronic birds out of the sky, because they'll fry birds too. Like I said, it's microwave radiation. But once you've got that and you're taking out drones up front, that changes the dynamic totally, because that's all Ukraine has right now is a quote drone wall. They literally have 4 or 5 drones for every Russian infantryman coming out. Now, the majority of drones don't make targets. They lose them. They either get shut down or they get they hit obstacles and so on. But there's still quite more than a third that finds their targets, and that's been what has been holding things up. Now, even then, you get the problem of everything's green now, and vegetation. As we know, these drones are actually very fragile. If any of the propellers are taken or damaged, the drone just falls out of the sky. It can't stand in the air. So there's a lot of these options. If a lot, I think, is riding now. If this Chinese technology that they've manufactured, and right, Russia's working on, everybody's working on. Chinese have beaten everybody to the punchline, just like they've done, by the way, with photonic cells for AI that are about 1,000 times faster than the best NVIDIA chips they can produce, which is a game changer. It's just starting to hit the market. The technology advances in China are very quick, are very, very quick. And it's just not being acknowledged in the West. If this comes in and this works out, this would rebalance the battlefield back toward large-scale movements, which would be disastrous for Ukraine.
Yeah. Stanislav, this has been an absolutely brilliant program. Thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Absolutely.
Stanislav, before you go, where can people follow your work?
Kofi, follow me.